Hi everybody, and welcome again to the next session of our Conversation Aviation videocasts podcasts. My name's John Franklin and I'm head of safety promotion here at EASA, and it's kind of exciting for us this week because I'm actually here recording live in the hall at the European Rotors Show, where we have the whole European helicopter community coming together for 3 days of safety discussions and these conversations that we've been talking so much about in these different sessions. So it's been great to get together with real people in person and kind of take the discussions that we've been having, actually out into the community. So yeah, it's really great, and great to have the usual hosts on board. Do you want to introduce yourselves, guys?
Yeah, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Wherever you're watching, I'm Chris Drew. I work for a company called Oliver Wyman. I'm really pleased to co-host with Claudio and John again another session, and one particularly dear to my heart. My sort of part in this is I've been working with John and the team for a while on the Together for Safety efforts around safety management as well, and also have a sort of history with the European Human Factors Advisory Group, which is now the Collaborative Analysis Group for Human Factors, which is a long thing to say in the first place. But welcome to the guests. Really, as I say, looking forward to the conversation, and hope we have a good one. Over to Claudio.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. Claudio here, head of TC Alliance. And Chris already said, just really looking forward to this topic today, which is close to everybody's heart, all about trust and getting everybody to work together. So further ado, hand back to John.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, I think this topic of all of the ones we've covered, is in a sense, it's the most important because it's at the heart of everything we do. If we badge the title of this, if I formally define it, is setting a culture of trust that encourages reporting and for people to openly be able to talk about safety and well-being. And Stuart, we started working together with you, talking as we were trying to integrate well-being into this, the general safety picture. And at the heart of what we're trying to do with Conversation Aviation is to have these positive safety conversations, across organizations, within organizations, and this topic of the culture of trust and psychological safety. Without this, the whole thing doesn't even work at all. So that's the basic subject that we're talking about. And we start first by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. So Claire, can you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, thank you, John. Good morning, and thanks so much for inviting me to share this with you today. I am the programme lead for aviation peer support at Cora Human Factors. I'm also a mental health first aid England instructor member, wellbeing specialist, and I'm hugely passionate about what we're going to talk about today, so thanks.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for joining us. And Juan-Carlos next.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I join Claire on thanking you for inviting me to this podcast. And well, I'm Juan-Carlos Lozano. I am an airline pilot. I am the vice president of the European Cockpit Association, and I'm an aircraft accident investigator. And my background, apart from being a pure pilot, is safety. So thank you.
Fantastic. It's great. I was really pleased that we could get somebody from the European Cockpit Association. You're involved in so many of these discussions on this topic. It's great to have you involved. So thanks for joining. And finally, Stuart.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, John, Claudio, and Chris for having us. Stuart Beach, one of the founders of Resilient Pilot, set up to support pilots who've been displaced from the pandemic, and also an airline pilot and a CRMT. And looking forward to this discussion today.
And I think in terms of, I think certainly that I've been working in aviation, in civil aviation now for more than 10 years. And my initial focus work here at EASA has been on occurrence reporting, and just culture has been a huge part of that. And some people, I hate quoting regulations and things, but there was something called Regulation 376/2014 that introduced at least the foundation of the concept of just culture within occurrence reporting at European level. But I think that's one of the biggest challenges we've had within the industry, has been how do we turn that into a reality? Is how do we really create this environment where people, people in organizations feel part of the safety system? I mean, Chris, I know, you've spent even longer working on this topic than I have. And I think in terms of challenges, this is probably one of the biggest ones, and actually also one of the most beneficial, I think, to the industry.
Yeah, I think so. And we had that conversation, John, when 376 came out at European Commission. And I think it's one of those subjects that sometimes divides people. Is on one hand, when you talk about just culture, and you talk about toolkits and models that James Reason wrote in a book years ago, and companies on one hand went down to develop those and make them a sort of formal system and something they could refer to when they had a process map to flow and go through that, which is commendable and works well when it's done well. On the other hand, some people are of the opinion that it should just be a culture thing, and everyone kind of should behave in a way that the company safety policy espouses, and that should flow down from the top, and natural leadership should make that happen, and you shouldn't need a toolkit and a flow chart. I just wondered, for the panel members, generally kicking off with that question, where do you see that, where's the sweet spot with that, I guess, between a formal sort of systemized approach to just culture, as John pointed out, underpinning things like 376. I know we're not just talking about just culture here, but that's this starting point, I guess. And then the other end of the scale, where it's more, I guess, a natural extension of the leadership you want to see in a business. What do you think, guys? Anyone can jump in.
I would.
I'll go for it. I think that, yes, the processes that we have in place and the disciplinary processes are important to a degree. And I think, especially in aviation, we are very process driven, and it's what we do. But I think that the trust side of things that has been mentioned so far is incredibly important. The management and leadership skills, the empathy that comes through with that is becoming more apparent and more required within leadership, is also incredibly important as well. So I'm not sure what the sweet spot is, but I think both are important.
Yeah.
And bringing that humanization aspect to it even more, isn't it? From the top down. It's an opportunity for the leadership team to actually put that into place. But just on the just culture side, I mean, I was just thinking about when you talk about models. So a model, I think that's sort of being encouraged, not just within the frontline operations side of things, but in the organization itself, is threat error management. So identifying not just organizational threats, but personal threats, where this brings in your resilience building. So if you can identify, threats or behaviors, then you're able to then somehow, or encourage, that process of identifying them throughout the whole organization to build resilience. I think that's one model we could transfer.
Can you give some examples of that?
Please.
Again.
No, I was simply saying that I fully agree with Stuart, that I see these, at least on the initial stages, is a top-down approach, definitely. I've been involved in some kind of implementation of a just culture, safety culture in a Latin American airline before I joined ECA. And all the project, everything came with the commitment of the CEO of that airline saying, I want this. Unfortunately, and this is repetitive in time, the CEO was convinced of that right after an accident. Hopefully there were no victims in that accident, but they learned from a thorough investigation, they learned that there were so many things that they didn't know about their organization, that it was so challenging to at least to say, okay, let's try this. And it was, I think it was a great exercise for people that normally only deal with, let's say, economical, financial decisions, to get into this slippery zone that is safety. And it's interesting. And then once you have taken that first step of engaging the top management of the airline, then is the moment of, and it takes longer to convince the rest of the organization that this is valuable for the whole organization, from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, so it seems to me that there is, as you know, the sweet spot is an elusive thing, but something that on one hand is chicken and egg. You need some kind of process and some formality and something to point at and to work with, because obviously top leadership, people change in, change out, and they have different opinions and different views on life. So I think you need some sort of anchor that with a magic wand, you would then throw the anchor overboard and then chop the chain off, and you could sail off on a really mature just culture with the trust that you've built. But I think it's just trying to kind of balance off those two things. It's just a question I thought I'd start with, because I've seen it so many times where there is that kind of completely different view on how that should be built in terms of trust and how that works. Going back to your point though, Stuart, with the threat and error management, would you say that model, I mean, I'm aware, I'm familiar with it.
Yes. Yeah.
Would you say that kind of needs to coexist though with something that powers that, like how you build just culture to then get people to actually disclose what they see as threats or errors in their workspace, and then that's actually credibly dealt with?
Absolutely, and it comes with, I mean, threat management comes with a competency-based profession. So within an airline or within an organization, there's plenty of skill sets that have that. So, and obviously the competence, the countermeasures, for the threats and the errors. So if there's a system there, and it's not just on the professional side, but for the personal side as well. So let's say the resilience side, we have countermeasures and behaviors to improve our well-being and resilience. So if we're able to encourage and identify, a system where we can identify those things that are causing the issues in that just culture, in that open culture, then and as you said, it's going to take some time. There's going to be a huge lag, isn't there? And as people come and go, but an embedded framework would be the way forward.
I think, as Juan says, is that often it's in retrospect you're looking at something, and I know John knows this, but when we talk about SMS, safety management systems, I'll often call it a surprise management system, because when you turn around and find out really what's been going on, and you do a good investigation that really gets under the human factors issues and just culture issues, quite a lot it's a surprise to people that didn't realize things were going on as they do in businesses. So as John said at the top, it's such a valuable aspect of organizational culture and how well it performs. Then, it's just the challenges that are in place that need to make it efficient and effective that we need to talk about. So I guess that's the next question to the group as well is, what challenges have you seen to this, and what good practices that have you seen that help to address those challenges?
If I may, I think that we need to differentiate. I mean, SMS is a regulation requirement, so every organization will implement that, and the authorities have the obligation to verify that and to oversight that and all. But safety culture is nowhere. I mean, there's nowhere in the regulation. So first, you need to convince that. I mean, SMS can give you nice pictures, or better than pictures, can give you nice numbers in order to know what's going on. But as a Stuart was mentioning, but everything that lies below that, you need that. You need a safety culture in order to identify what's going on below the numbers. And I think it's important because it's easy to confuse these two elements, and you can have an SMS, and we see some examples, not only in Europe but all over the world, that they have sound SMS with good tools and processes and all the stuff, but they don't have a safety culture at all, because these SMS has been is coming because it's pure compliance.
It's been regulated into existence. Yeah.
So and unfortunately it lacks the other part, and nobody cares about what's below the surface. And I think that we need to take steps on I don't know, convincing or I don't know the name, to to implement both things. I mean, safety culture is absolutely needed in those places where an SMS is actually running.
And I completely recognize that. And you'll all be familiar, I guess, with the evaluation system that is in place, the maturity of SMS, PSOE, the present, suitable, operating, effective. And I guess the bit you're talking about, P&S, you can have a system, it's regulatory compliant, it's got the right processes and tools, but actually it's not giving the organization what they thought it should in the first place. So that's the E, the effective bit, right? The right, towards the right end of the scale. So I guess that's the question: how do you get an organization to want to go towards E from S or maybe O operating?
I think for me that's where the trust comes in.
Yeah,
that is the essential part of it. It's the human element of that whole process.
right.
It's the fact that the people in it are trusted and that they are, they are ingrained. It's ingrained in them, and that's, I think, going with what Juan-Carlos was saying before about it being top down. If it starts from the very top and works its way down, those factors will be ingrained in the culture.
And it's interesting. One of the things that, in fact, we've been talking quite a bit here at European Rotors with the helicopter community, but it's something I hear quite a lot, is that there's the top-down element and then there's the kind of operational workforce. And I think one of the biggest challenges I see a lot of is the middle, particularly middle operational managers who are responsible for operational delivery. And it's how do you find that balance between, kind of supporting the natural need for operational objectives and operational output, but enabling the kinds of conversations that improve safety, create that culture of trust, and actually for people, I think particularly in that middle management layer, to see the benefit that brings to human performance and operational outcomes, if that makes sense.
If you, a question that I always ask and is, what would our next generation aviation professionals expect from an organization? So the next generation that are coming in, well, I can't remember what we're up to now. Is it generation X or Y or Z? But what is they expect a just culture. They expect a non-jeopardy psychological space. They expect wellbeing framework. They expect, like I said, all those humanization items when they come to an organization. So the question is to future-proof this, that the next generation themselves will help us integrate this and force it in. So if we're looking ahead 10 years down the line, just ask ourselves those. I'm interested to hear what other people think about that.
Absolutely agree, Stuart. I think I've been in human factors and CRM training for the last 20 years, and the change that I've seen in that time, from it being words like psychobabble bandied around, and then to actually being a very well respected discipline and very accepted now with the conversations we're having here. So it takes time, and I think it's just about being consistent, and it's about being aware and just introduce, but having those processes behind it as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go, Chris.
No, I again completely agree. I've witnessed one program that started off at a place where reporting of anything was just non-existent. The culture was just not set up at all for anything to do with trust or open reporting of data. And through that persistent and consistent application of process and repeated training as well to support, and actually in workplace observations and reinforcement. And John, to your point, that Venturi you talk about, the middle management squeeze, they made a massive push to make sure those people were supported in change behaviors. And eventually, after what must it be now, it's 13, 14 years later, it's completely turned on its head. The default questions and behaviors and discussions are all about reporting and just culture. So I think it can be done, but it's just, it's how much resource, I guess, the organization wants to put in to see what and values what the prize is and knows what the prize is all about, to have that continual effort, I guess.
I think you make a fantastic point there, Chris. And now that we're coming to the end of the 20 minutes, I want to try and ask a difficult question to each of the panelists. And obviously, what we've taken away from this, what we've identified, is that trust has to come from top down. It has to be embedded within the environment, not just within safety management systems. But that aside, what type of tangible advice would you give? Say you had to sit down today with a middle manager who didn't really understand the difference between it, and you wanted to help implement it within an organization. What would be the tangible bit of 30-second advice that you would give to that organization? Maybe start off with Claire. That is a difficult one. And this is what we're trying to do.
Thinking about. I would say one of the main things is tell your story and be yourself. Yeah, so historically, management has been seen, it's been very target driven, it's been very about getting results. I think now management is changing. There's been lots and lots of studies about it, about how we can sort of present ourselves as a human being to our staff within the realms of still being in that hierarchy as such. However, I think just being yourself, showing your vulnerabilities allows other people to show theirs as well.
I think that's fantastic advice. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
If I may, first, I think you need to be clear. What do you want?
Mm-hmm.
And what do you want to achieve? Because we tend to confuse a little bit this non-punitive or non-punishment thing with the just culture, which is, in my opinion, is completely different. And I normally put that example. My son is 14, and if something happens at home, and I say, okay, tell me what has happened, and I will not slap on your face. Well, he will probably tell me, but it does not generate any kind of trust. So I think that it's very clear that just culture is not about reporting only. It's about knowing the state of your organization. There is a very nice story about, I think it was General Motors CEO or something like that, a new one that came, and the company was losing money by millions of dollars. And every time he joined the board and the directors, everything was fine until the third or fourth board meeting, somebody came with bad news and say, okay, in my department, this is happening. And the CEO said, oh, this is exactly what I want to know. I want to know what's going bad in order to fix that. And just culture or safety culture with the differences, because just culture, I think that we are privileged to talk about just culture here in Europe, but once you get outside the borders of Europe, it's difficult to talk about that. It's an excellent tool for the management to know what's going on in the airline, in the maintenance organization or whatever. So it's important to identify what are we talking about and what are the objectives of that.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
And finally, Stuart.
For me, I mean, coming from, I'm going to bring it from the employee level. So it's about making sure the employee performs at the best and essentially improves safety. And to me, it boils down to behaviours from the top down to the bottom. It's behaviours of the individual people that make up the overall, performance and safety of the organisation. I'm going to bring resilience into it here. Mm-hmm. So those behaviours, and it's identifying, key behaviours for the overall effectiveness of that organisation. So that adaptive capacity, basically. So ensuring that we have a space that we can share what those behaviours are and what and openly come up with solutions together. So that for me is those components.
Excellent, thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
And I think this is where, as we kind of bring the discussion to a close, I think we've covered some really great points. It's difficult to kind of cover such a detailed subject in 20-25 minutes, but I think we've really kind of hit a lot of the key points here. And it's interesting, I don't know if any of you have read it. I'm in the middle at the moment of reading a book called Next Generation Safety Leadership by an Australian guy called Clive Lloyd. I know some of us have talked about Clive's work in the past, and certainly Paul Cullum from the Lived Experience Wellbeing Project at Trinity College. I know Paul and I talk a lot about that book, but that's a great example if anybody's looking for some kind of further reading on what this looks like within an organization and what you can do practically. But there's some really great kind of key points even in the first parts of that book about normalizing these conversations. And like you were saying about the example of General Motors there, Juan-Carlos, that it's how do you create that environment where people tell you the things that they're perhaps scared to tell you, and the things that your staff talk about when you're not there, and the things that actually would make an organization more effective, both operationally and safer. And actually, one of the key things we haven't touched on so much, and we're going to have a whole cycle of discussion about the wider question of well-being and psychological safety. But it also helps just create an environment where people feel safer and happier coming to work, because they're not scared, and like we would say, certainly in English, we would say walking on eggshells about what they're going to say that might cost them, in the future. I think that's a huge challenge. I know, what do you think, Claudio, to sum up?
I think that's a great way of summing it up, and I think everybody has gave some actually great tangible advice for everybody, for organizations and individuals, that can actually help them on their way to actually having a more trustworthy and therefore safe environment. So thank you everybody for coming along today and discussing this, and hopefully everybody can learn from it.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you. Thanks for
Great.
us.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks to everybody here. I managed to get through the whole session without, I had a couple of moments where people suddenly saw me and came to talk to me. I was like, hands, oh, stop. So it's been an interesting experience doing it in a live hall full of a few hundred people. So
Can't see
thanks very much. And
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
thanks. Bye.